If you have ever been part of the Versus community, then you should be no stranger to the absurd power of comic book characters. And although today's sadistic heroes are nowhere near the strongest comic book characters out there, they are certainly some of the most comically overpowered ones. Stardust, the Super Wizard, versus Fantomah, the Mystery Jungle Woman and Daughter of the Pharaohs. I am Baron Karza, and I'm here to ask a question you never fucking asked. Which of these two fighters would win in a no holds bar fight to the death? So, what's the theme here? I'm glad you asked, dear viewer. You see, before we can talk about Stardust and Phantoma, we need to talk about Fletcher Hanks. Fletcher Hanks is a peculiar figure in the history of comic books. First off, most comic creators were teens around the time he was active, but when he joined, he was an adult. Second, we don't even have any pictures of the guy except for a panel in Stardust, which his son claims was a self-portrait. From what little information we can gather on this man, his family saw him as a monster because he was a raging alcoholic who abused his family. And you could see from his writing that something isn't quite right with this man. I mean, just look at some of the punishments that the heroes inflict. Both Stardust and Phantoma also have no supporting cast, and just might reflect how Fletcher Hanks was living by himself. Some people claim that they saw Hanks's dead body on a wooden bench in a park. He was believed to have died of hypothermia, which is a fitting yet cruel fate for a man like him. So, what's the theme here, dear viewer? Nigh omnipotent superheroes who use their powers to inflict cruel and unusual punishments. Said superheroes were also created by the same drunken monster.
What would you do if you became an unstoppable cosmic force? Would you become a god and lead people to the ideal path? Would you protect the innocent from harm? Would you end all suffering on earth? Or would you become an omnipotent tyrant? Well, I don't know about you, but I have enough faith in humanity to believe that the average person would not be as ruthless with their powers as Stardust. Unlike a lot of superheroes who have a secret identity or an alter ego, as far as we know, before Stardust was Stardust, he was Stardust. We don't even know how he got his powers. All we know is that he's some kind of interplanetary crime buster. As in the first story, people already seem to know about him and his exploits when he first arrived. And the radio folks say that he has rid other worlds of crime. My fear is that he's some kind of space policeman, which is further supported by the various space jails that he takes criminals to and his crime detecting machine, which he also has, which is actually surprisingly common for superheroes, at least old ones. Batman had one of those. Remember Batman the Brave and the Bold? It's my first Batman cartoon. It was great. Really, the closest thing we have resembling a backstory is that he lives in some star somewhere with a woman who he rescued. Was only present for like one story. She never appeared again. That lack of supporting cast might reflect Hank's loneliness and how he was kicked out of his family. Now, despite Stardust being well known for his cruel and almost sadistic punishments, they're somewhat inconsistent. Well, at least at first. You never know if he'll send a bad guy to jail or give him a fate worse than death. My fear is that Stardust was created as Hanks was becoming a more vindictive person. But we only saw more ruthless punishments later because that's when he sort of became a very violent individual.
Stardust has your standard superhero powers. He has super strength. He can fly. He can breathe under any conditions. He can turn invisible. So far, nothing too weird. He also has mental powers that can control other people's actions and even change their personalities, which is a little strange, but his weirdest powers are gonna be a little segment I call the many flavors of Stardust's rays. Among Stardust's strongest and weirder powers are his many different types of rays. There are so many ray related powers that the only way I could reasonably explain all of them is through a list. So first off, we got the boomerang ray, which makes a machine's function turn on itself. Basically, if I have a laser gun and he uses the boomerang ray, the laser gun will basically shoot itself. The suspension ray suspends objects in the air. He has an unnamed ray that can summon skeletons of the people someone's killed. He has an anti gravity ray. He has an anti motion ray, which makes objects become inert. He has reducing rays, which shrink objects. He has the retarding ray. I'm sorry, guys. Which can slow down an object's momentum. He has the extinguishing ray, which extinguishes fire. The fusion rays, it destroys technology by essentially turning it inside out. The disintegrating ray does exactly what it sounds like. The radiophonic thought recording ray, that's a mouthful, can manipulate people's thoughts. He has magnetic rays, which draw objects closer to him. And you'd think it only affects metal, but it affects anything Stardust chooses, including people. He has a transporting ray, which can send people to other places. Says not even teleportation. You just fly to where he chooses you to go. He has transforming rays, which can turn people into rats, icicles, and/or worms. It can also change people's shapes by making them bigger or turning them into a giant head, which leads to this iconic scene. Concentrate array fuses multiple people into one, and fun fact, this would be referenced in a fan made reboot. The propelling ray sends people flying into space. The invisible ray can make objects invisible. The shadow transfer ray is something that I honestly don't know how to explain, but I think it affects the light around something. The agitator ray can create tidal waves. Jeez, dude. But all these ray related powers, you'd think his name would be Rayman. It's important to note that Stardust can fire multiple rays at once in any direction, though it seems like he can only use one type of ray at a time. He also has a few miscellaneous powers. Debatably, he has the ability to change size, though it's never explicitly stated. His size is rather inconsistent. And considering that he can change the size of others, I don't think it'd be too much of a stretch to say that he could change his own size. He can turn his hands into weird tentacles to get a better grip on criminals, but I have no idea why he has this power to begin with. He can encase people in a crystal prison. He has some kind of spider sense that warns him if something is aimed at him. He can shapeshift like at the time he turned into a panther. He can create acid proof smoke. He can deflect the sun's rays to incinerate people. The Stardust Flash can create a star shaped object made of God knows what that can cut through things like wood and can turn into a planet sized shield. He can also give his powers to other people, which is honestly kind of terrifying. Like, just imagine an army of Stardusts. Oh, wait, you don't have to. It happened in the comics, and they call themselves the Sixth Column. And you know what's the worst thing about these powers? There's probably a few I forgot to mention. He's just got that many powers. Okay, so Stardust can easily beat giant vultures that are stated to be able to bend steel. He can throw people into space casually. He can fight while moving at 300,000 miles per minute, and at his fastest, he can go millions of times faster than light. He crashed into a group of thugs so hard that the friction turned them into ash. He lifted up an island and redirected the planet of Mars that was on a collision course to Earth. And probably his most bizarre feat was creating a decoy Earth out of gas. But who could forget his greatest feat? Saving America from financial ruin. No, I will not give context for this. You're just going to have to find it yourself on Comic Book Plus. Weaknesses? What weaknesses? This character is essentially Hanks's power fantasy. In every comic, he beats the villains with so little effort that the stories would be boring if they weren't so bizarre. Stardust is basically what people who've never read a comic think Superman is like, an all powerful god with no humanity to make him relatable. He's not a man, he's an unstoppable force dedicated to punishing criminals for their heinous acts. So watch up super criminals, where if you continue down your path of crime, Stardust will be there. There will be no escape, and you better pray to God he doesn't find your crime unforgivable that day. Deep in the heart of the African jungle, you can hear Fantomah rumble. Sorry. Good help it. Just want to use one of my old school's sports cries. Anyway, unlike her brother Stardust, we actually know something about Fantomah's backstory. Though it wasn't Hanks who wrote it, rather a man by what is likely a pseudonym of W.B. Hovius, who seemed to make it his solemn duty to just nerf the hell out of Fantomah. But Fantomah's backstory goes like this. She is the lost daughter of the pharaohs, and her powers come from the gods. Throughout Fletcher's run on the character, Fantomah was a guardian of the jungle, and unlike Stardust, whose punishments were inconsistent, if you didn't heed to Fantomah's first warning, you were to die a jungle death, as she'd put it. Fantomah's punishments were always more cruel and violent, with stuff like dismemberment, being eaten by wild animals, and since Fantomah came later, I think that she was created around the time when Frank was at his worst, both as a person and in terms of his situation. Being such a bitter man at this point in time, he created Fantomah, and though considering Fletcher Hank supposedly died in the snow in the 30s after Fantomah's creation, I could be saying a whole lot of nothing. Though I don't want to repeat too much what I said about Stardust. Though I think it's worth noting that Fantoma's stories are sillier. One story starts with a guy just opening up a window and saying he wants to kill every animal in the jungle. Why? Because one day while out hunting, he was attacked by a lion, followed by an elephant throwing him into a lake, followed by being stung by poisonous gnats, shortly before being crushed by a constrictor, and before he could be snake food, a gorilla saved him, but then that gorilla would go on to torture him for several months. There's also a few interactions I find funny, where 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 a guy just plans to destroy civilization with an army of panthers. It feels like a Florida Man headline. And when Fantomah warns him, he tells her to mind her own business. Like, oh, okay, there's this mystical ghost lady just going, don't do this. And he goes, mind your own business. Seriously, if you're looking for something that's so bad it's good, please read Hanks' Stardust and Fantomah on Comic Book Plus. Even if you don't like comics, I highly recommend it.
Oh boy, I sure hope you like me listing off powers, because once again, we have a lot of stuff to cover. And luckily, they're not all rays, just manifestations of Fantomah's will. So, first off, she has telekinesis, which can allow her to move heavy objects, and it even gives her the ability to give jungle life to fly. She has invisibility, a jungle restoration ray, which essentially returns jungle life back to its natural state. TLDR, if an animal suffers an unnatural disease or a change that is not something it will normally go through, the jungle restoration ray will just return it to its gen- to its status quo. Fantomah can communicate with animals to give them commands, though it's more like Namor of a Submariner's mind powers, and less like Aquaman's, since the animals still retain their own free will. Fantomah has a paralyzing ray, the ability to manipulate the weather to create tornadoes, clouds that can destroy planes and thunderstorms. She can turn rocks into clouds and back again. She can transform people into other kinds of creatures. She can turn people into skeletons. She has a super willpower ray, which can control the actions of other people, which made someone crash their plane. She has a flashing ray, which sets things on fire. She can manipulate people's dreams. She can shrink objects and people. She can record thought vibrations to read minds. She has an analytical ray, which can separate chemical elements. Superiority rays, waves, which render someone motionless. With the power of the god, she can summon spectral elephants and snakes. She can fuse multiple people together like Stardust. She can control mud by making it flood a good chunk of the jungle, and she can control water well enough to redirect a giant wave. She also has a few weapons, which aren't really going to be very useful. She's got like a spear, bow, and arrow. And though, well, let's be real, the powers kind of make it pointless. But I think, but though I think it's worth noting that in Hobius's run, she Fantomah had a panther named Fury that pretty much killed one of every single jungle predator. Lions, tigers, snakes, you name it, Fury probably killed it. Feats. She threw a spear so hard it sent a lion flying back. She was bulletproof, was able to redirect a wave that threatened to destroy the jungle, cut through a giant stone, telekinetically lift up multiple buildings, flew into space for a short period of time, sent a moonstone that she summoned from the Earth and sent it flying to Mars in only a few seconds. The impact was strong enough to scar the planet's surface. Weaknesses? Again, none whatsoever. Fantomah is an ancient guardian of the jungle, an embodiment of the forces of nature, laughing at the futile attempts of man to fight it. Do you really think she has any weaknesses? This is an odd matchup, to say the least. Both characters have so many powers, it's ridiculous. And despite possessing powers that can defeat most opponents easily, neither have shown to be able to resist powers similar to their own. In fact, Fantomah has shown that she can be shrunk. So, what powers do these characters have that counter each other? Surprisingly, Stardust has an advantage here. If Fantomah tried to transform him into something more manageable, Stardust could use his shapeshifting to turn himself back to his normal self. Assuming he has the ability to change size, he should be able to counter Fantomah's ability to shrink him. If Fantomah ever tried to catch him by surprise with her invisibility, Stardust's spider sense could warn him. Okay, here's kind of a cool idea for a fight. Fantomah sends a bunch of animals to attack Stardust, but Stardust turns them into humans and uses mind powers to get them on his side before giving them his powers. That would be cool. Then Fantomah uses her jungle restoration rate to turn him back to normal. This kind of situation is pretty much the only counter Fantomah has to anything Stardust has. So, Stardust's powers slightly trump Fantomah's. Can she make up for it in stats? Not really. Unlike Fantomah, we actually have an idea on how fast Stardust is. He can move millions of times faster than light, and his best combat speed feat is 300,000 miles per minute. Yes, Fantomah's best speed feat is likely faster than that given the Moonstone feat with the distance between Mars and Earth, but she's never shown to fight at such speeds. Strength also goes with Stardust since he's thrown people into space, while Fantomah's only feats of strength come from the stories that basically turned her into Tarzan with magic. If we were to use their telekinetic abilities, Stardust still stands above Fantomah. It was able to redirect Mars, which was on a collision course, to Earth, and Fantomah's got nothing on that. In the end, the power of Stardust was just way too much for the mystery jungle woman. Well, that's pretty much the end of the video. These two characters will probably remain the most powerful ones I cover on this channel for a while. At least until I decide to cover Marvel or DC characters, but that's a little unlikely at the moment. It won't be happening anytime soon. Whew. Man, I'm tired. Could you please be a dear and fletch me a beer?